Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Rumcast. We are the podcast that talks all things rum related with the people who love and shape it. And for today, Will, those two people are just you and I talking about something I think we as Americans will very much enjoy discussing: American rum.
That's right. A lot of firsthand experience on this one.
Yeah, so that will be fun to go over. There's a lot of American rum out there, so
A lot. A
I
lot.
think this will be interesting in how we approach this and try to tackle such a big subject that has so much to it.
It's a big task, but I think we're up for the challenge.
Of course. I had a recent experience, Will, with going to New York that I wanted to
That's
tell you
right.
about before we kind of get started tackling the main subject today. So my wife and I, we went on a trip to New York for a few days.
Mhm.
No kids, Will. No kids
Oh,
for
nice.
the first time in a long time. We've taken a trip since our honeymoon, maybe,
Really?
with just us. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. How did
Um,
that feel?
Fantastic.
You don't want to be like too effusive about it, right?
Yeah, no, we definitely miss the kids, and there's always things that you're like, oh, we want to come back and we want to show them
Right.
these things. But at the same time, there is something nice about, a trip where it's just, the couple, me
Yeah,
and her, where we get to bond and do all these things. It was her first time in New York, so we did a lot of the normal sightseeing
that's
type of
cool.
things. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of rum focus, but there was some really key things that I wanted to talk about. One of which, really quickly, was cool documents. They're in a small museum in this place called Francis Tavern. And this is a
Wait,
very
cool
old,
documents?
yes,
Okay.
documents.
I
Yeah.
thought I thought like cool documents was the name of a bar or something. You're talking
You know
about
what? I'm gonna
literal.
take that.
Don't use that. That's a terrible bar name. No one wants to go to a bar with
on,
documents in the
on
name,
second
except
thought, you're
maybe
right.
you. Okay,
It
so you
sounds more like a
found
boring company that does labels or something. Cool
you
documents.
found some cool historical documents, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So in a place called Francis Tavern, where we
Uh-huh.
actually ended up having dinner and some drinks, but they have a small museum because this place is super old. It's on Pearl Street there in downtown, and it's like this little almost founding fathers, George Washington type of small museum, because apparently
Okay.
they met there, Alexander Hamilton and other people. And there's some things there that talk about rum and molasses being such a key industry in the
Right.
18th century. And
Uh-huh.
that was pretty cool to see. And, I'll spare you the boring details on it, but just interesting as a reminder to say at that time when America was kind of coming together, how
Hmm.
big an industry rum was here and for people at that time.
Hmm.
Um, but I
Yeah.
think that, yeah,
I was just
yeah.
gonna say I had a similar experience. I went to Memphis a few weekends ago and went to the National Civil Rights Museum for I'd
Oh,
been there before, like on a field trip as a kid, but I
mhm.
hadn't gone back as an adult. It's at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, which is where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So they've kind of turned the site into this,
Mhm.
it's like a memorial, but also a museum that tells the entire like history of civil rights, starting obviously with the slave trade, and you go through a bunch of exhibits, and there's one that has an entire like wall that's all about the rum trade, and
Mm.
obviously it's the the awful parts of it that are part of the history and everything, but it really is shocking as you see just how massive of an industry it was
Yeah.
in that early part of the country. And yeah, it's just, I feel like anytime now as a rum person that you like run into those little, there are so many little reminders of like rum's tie-ins to American history, and you can like
Yeah.
run into it anywhere, you in New York, me in Memphis. So it just brought that to mind for me.
No, I totally agree, and it's an interesting setup for as we talk about the modern kind of rum landscape now for that. But before we get to that, I did want to mention also another highlight of the trip, which was a place near Times Square called the Rum House.
Okay, yeah,
So,
I'm familiar with this place. I haven't been. It's one of those things
okay,
that like I looked at last time I was in New York, but I was like, just didn't have time. So how was the
yeah,
Rum House?
And you remember I went in November for a trip to New
Hmm.
York, and I didn't get to go there then. But what I was saying then was, man, I was surprised that New York didn't have as many rum places as I thought it would have.
Right.
I really tried to make an effort this time. Actually, I should give the credit to my wife who really made the effort to say, "Hey, we're going to go to this place because I found it for you, and I think you'll enjoy it."
Oh,
So
that's
thank you to
nice.
her for doing
Yeah.
that. So we go in there and it's a small, little place, but they've got an impressive rum selection,
Hmm.
decent. So we look over, the menu for that. And the first thing that struck me was, holy cow, that's very expensive for neat pours.
Oh yeah.
Um, like,
What's the range that we're talking?
well, I mean, they had anything from, I would say, $18 or so all the way up to like 120.
Okay.
An ECC, excuse me, a four square ECS was like $50 to $70 for a neat pour, 1 ounce. And I
Bargain,
was like,
right?
that's not gonna happen. So now I'm like, okay, well, I'm not super like a cocktail guy, but I'm here and this place looks like it has really interesting cocktails.
Uh-huh.
So my wife said, well, just get a cocktail. So I did. I got this cocktail. Well, I had to tell you about this
Okay.
because number one, I really enjoyed it. I thought
All
it was
right.
very good. So this was called Smoke on the Water is the name that they gave this cocktail.
Okay.
And it was Plantation Dark Rum, Worthy Park 109, Calvados, heavily smoked Lapsang Souchong tea,
Okay.
something called Punt MS, which I'm not even sure what that is, to
That's
be honest with
vermouth.
you.
Punta
Oh, that's
Mess.
just vermouth.
It's sweet
Ah,
vermouth, yeah.
okay. Honey and then green chartreuse.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
It was fantastic. I'm
Yeah.
giving it the fantastic Gullah seal of approval because it
Yeah.
was it was really really good. I enjoyed it. It was spirit forward as you might
Yeah.
expect, which I really liked. And just overall had a great experience. And as I said, I don't drink too many cocktails, so two of those, and I was like, "Woo!" We were enjoying New York very fast.
Yeah.
so,
That
um,
sounds like a cocktail that I would gravitate toward. And I feel like it's also timely because I'm guessing you may not have heard about this, but there's kind of I don't want to contribute to panic buying, but there's a little bit of
mm,
panic buying going on around green and yellow chartreuse right now. Because
mhm.
do you know much about chartreuse and how it's made?
You should enlighten me more because I know a little bit, but probably
Well,
not enough
I'm no,
to.
I'm not
Yeah.
an expert. I just
Okay.
know I believe it's made in France, and I believe it's made by monks, as it
Right.
has for like hundreds of years. And I don't know how true this is, but what I've seen a little bit online is that the monks are basically like, we're not really interested in like spending more time on chartreuse. It's kind of like distracting us from whatever else monks do all day.
Monk
I
things.
assume they do other stuff besides making this very delicious expensive liqueur. But so yeah, like a lot of like a lot of people online and like cocktail communities are just posting, photos of chartreuse in stores and like loading up on stuff. I've been to a few liquor stores in Nashville over the past few weeks, and I have specifically looked for it and haven't seen it anywhere. So
Huh.
yeah, it's interesting times for chartreuse lovers right now.
You said you weren't trying to do the panic buying, but now I feel like I have to go
I don't
find a
want to
bottle
encourage panic buying, but
immediately after we're done with this.
that would be quite a
Um,
purchase for you as a non-cocktail person. Do you know how much a bottle of green chartreuse will set you back?
Want to say $40 here?
Uh-uh.
No, it's
I
going to be
mean,
more expensive than that.
everywhere I've seen it, it's usually over $60.
Really?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, going back several years. So, I mean, if you found it somewhere for $40, I'm
I
not
should
calling
buy
you
it.
a liar, but I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
that would be an amazing deal. That would be like finding, I don't know, a Foursquare ECS release for like $60 or something.
I have a memory of it being in the $40 to $50 range here. But
Maybe
yeah,
was
now
it the 375 bottles? Because
maybe
some
that could
places
be.
sometimes have those.
That could be. That could
Yeah.
be. Yeah. To your point, that's not my usual area, so I don't have the memory banks fired up for that. But yeah, so it was a really good drink, and I'm really thankful for the experience.
Nice.
Um, I have to kind of acknowledge one thing before we get into our subject here of the
Okay.
day, American rum, which
Hmm.
is that one of the things that led me to contact you to start this podcast up in the first place was that you were doing the AmericanRumReport.com,
Right.
which I found is a great resource for all things related to American rum, and just felt like this is a guy who's doing something, who knows what he's wanting to do. I didn't have a soft spot for American rum in the same way, and I felt like, that was something interesting that you were doing that led me into wanting to talk to you more. So, I felt like we had to
It
acknowledge
brought
that to
us
begin.
together.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting. The first thing I ever did content wise related to rum was making American Rum Report. And part of the reason why I did that was because I knew I wanted to write or create some type of content about rum. And I was honestly like, there was already a lot of great content out there about, Caribbean rums around the world. And
Hmm.
I was kind of intimidated about trying to do something about the wider rum world. And I just kind of noticed like how it felt like hundreds and hundreds of distilleries in the US making rum. And whenever I tried to find out information about their rum, like how it's made,
Hmm.
all that stuff, it was really hard to wrangle all the details. So I was like, no one has a place that has all these details. I could
Yeah.
do that.
You're
And
like, someone should do this.
I was like, since no one else is doing it, I can do it. And
Okay.
I don't have to like, be afraid of like my stuff not being as good as someone else's. So it was like, no one else is writing about this. I can write about this. And then when I met you and we started, both had talked about wanting to do a podcast kind of, but not really
Hmm.
knowing what to do. Like that was the nudge. I think that like having someone else in it with me, like made me a lot
Mm.
more confident in being like, okay, like we can talk about all rum, it doesn't matter that other people are creating great content about rum.
Yeah.
There's room for more. So, yeah, it's kind
Cool.
of American rum was kind of the first little step, but I think the purpose of this episode today, so we've done a handful of episodes now, kind of rumcast guides to rums of other countries. We did Jamaica, we
Hmm.
did Puerto Rico, we did Mexico. So
Hmm.
I think those are the three we've done. And at some point we want kind of a full comprehensive set, but we're not really, trying to do them all one after the other. I think just over the course of the next couple of years we'll probably get a lot of these out. But
Yeah.
we thought it would be
As it
fun to
strikes our fancy. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
We thought it would be fun to do American rum because I think it's a category that is like there's so much stuff going on. It's just hard to kind of understand what it is, like who's making stuff that's worthwhile, what are like the stylistic
Hmm.
characteristics of it.
Hmm.
So we kind of want to make this episode, a guide for people to sort of get acquainted with the category and sort of like know where to look, and that sort of thing to hopefully find some quality stuff, because there is quality stuff, but there's also just a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it can
Yeah.
be hard to find the kind of the most interesting stuff. And then it can also be hard to get it just because the nature of distribution in the US and the fact that almost every distillery we're about to talk about on this episode is relatively young. The vast majority, I would say, started within the last decade. So they're starting small. They can't just be everywhere from the get-go.
Right.
There's not millions and millions of dollars behind most of these places. Some have investment to work with, but
Hmm.
anyway, so I think like a good place to start is just first of all, for the purposes of this episode, how are we defining American rum? Like what areas of the globe are we talking about? Because that can be kind of confusing because there's the United States of America, there's North
Right.
America, there's South America. So like what are we talking about on this episode? And for the purposes of this episode, we are basically tackling the mainland United States. So any rum made in all 50 states. And there are parts of the US that go beyond that. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, for
Right.
example. Puerto Ricans are American citizens. So,
But we
however,
already tackled that completely, right? Yeah.
exactly, we chose
Yeah.
to cover that separately,
Hmm.
not to exclude Puerto Rican rum from the category of American rum, but just because
Right.
Puerto Rican rum is kind of its own distinctive
Hmm. Hmm.
thing. It would almost feel like an insult to me to call to just like lump Puerto Rican rum in with American rum, because like modern American rum is also new, and while there is a history of it, there's not that continued history really.
Yeah.
Well, meanwhile, Puerto Ricans have been making rum continuously for a few hundred years now, and like they have their
Right.
own rum identity, rum style. So it's a thing that kind of needs to be discussed separately. But it's not to exclude anyone from being an American rum. I think you could, technically call it that if you wanted to, but we have a separate episode for that. We'll link to in the show notes. And then also, there is some stuff going on in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which are also a territory of the United States. But again, we kind of just want to let those be their own separate things to tackle at some point. And for the purpose of this episode, focusing on the 50 states. So that's, where we start with.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and we've covered some stuff of American rum in the past. We do have episodes where we've talked with Kyle from Kohana Rum. You had a great episode where you talked with Richland Rum, as well as a few other distilleries. So there is some content that we've done, but we've never kind of wrapped all of this up in this way and kind of tried to do our best to tie a bow on what is American rum, or how can we kind of break that into something that makes sense for people. And I think that the next part of that is, what does that mean stylistically? You mentioned, I think earlier, how do you even categorize this? Because it's so broad and diverse that you have to say, okay, well, is there one American rum style in the same way as there is a Barbados or a Jamaican style? And I think we can answer that. I'm going to answer that to start with and say no. I don't think you can do that with all American rum, because there's just these different places doing different things. So I think that that's probably where we have to start with talking, is how do we break that up?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And like, I think this is one of the first questions people have is like, what is like the American style of rum? And people often expect an answer that would be comparable to if you were describing Barbados rum or Jamaican rum. And that just doesn't exist for American rum for a couple of reasons. One is, like I was saying earlier, so many of these, I'll go beyond so many, like, 99.9% of these distilleries have only started within the last 10 to 15 years, with the vast majority being in the last 10 years. So a lot of these places are still figuring out their own style. Number one, they don't have this continued history of hundreds of years where, you go to Jamaica and each distillery has its own distinctive style, but there is kind of a through line where you can recognize Jamaican rums. That's one thing.
Yeah, it takes time. Yeah,
exactly. It takes time. And then the other reason, and this is kind of why I think even if all these distilleries kept distilling for the next 100 years, I still think 100 years from now, I don't think there would be a satisfying definition of American rum. And the other reason for that is, look at the US on a map, at just how physically large it is, how much territory it takes place. So what that means is, different parts of the country have slightly different cultures. I think that's true of smaller countries a lot of times too. But it's geographically the environment someone is in when they're making rum in Louisiana, for example, is like night and day from the environment someone is going to be making rum in if they're in like Minnesota or Maine, or
well, it's
Washington.
not only geographic, but it's cultural in some sense, right? So there's even that cultural basis, and I don't necessarily mean like cultural all the way back from like immigrant population type of thing, although in some cases like Louisiana, the French definitely makes its way in, but also just the fact that even today, the culture of America can be different in different places, and how that kind of modern culture affects how people are doing things. So
I think all those are reasons why there's not really a quote unquote American style of rum. And another question people have a lot is just like, how many distilleries are there, in the US making rum? And that number is a moving target, but the estimation I feel comfortable with putting out there would be anywhere from 500 to 700 distilleries making rum right now. And these are not all rum distilleries, which we'll get into that more in just a bit. But I think with that established about there not really being an American rum style, I do think that there are some common characteristics you see from these new distilleries, though. Some of those, I think, one we'll talk about right away for the rum geeks. We always talk about pot still rum, column still rum. most of these distilleries are going to be using batch distillation. So
Hmm.
again, most of these are small. So you're not going to see a lot of, huge continuous
Right.
multi-column distillation and things like that. You're going to see a lot of either straight up pot stills. You see a heck of a lot of hybrid stills, which kind
Yeah.
of allow the distiller to mix and match. They can do some pot still, they can do a column still run. They can engage certain amounts of plates, high or low, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you
why do you
see,
think that is, that there isn't as much of the continuous and it's more of a batch distillation? I
it's
have a
just
thought, but yeah,
I think it's just scale. I mean, to
yeah,
start with that kind of still, I mean, those stills are huge and
right,
they're very expensive. So,
right.
and they make a ton of rum. So
That was, yeah.
yeah, when you're starting small, it just makes sense to be doing batch distillation from like
And
an
there's no way you can compete with the likes of those that
exactly.
are already out there doing that. And so it just doesn't make sense from two perspectives, right? One is the
Yeah.
expense, and two is how are you going to try to do that to
Hmm.
start with on a
Right.
scale like that that's going to compete? Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see a lot of batch distillation, a lot of pot still distillation. You see one thing that's very common here and that I think can be a positive thing and a negative thing
Hmm.
is you will notice quickly a lot of places aren't just using molasses or cane juice, and you will find a good bit of cane juice in the US, which we'll talk about
Hmm.
soon. But the other kind of sugarcane byproduct that you see a lot are various forms of crystallized sugar. And I think when rum enthusiasts see that, their first instinct is to be like,
Turn their nose up at
like
it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like what? So they're just using like bagged white sugar. I mean, it's technically like by the definition of rum in the United States, that is still rum because
Yeah.
you just have to take literally anything that comes from sugarcane. Um,
I
so
admit a little bias towards that
yeah, well,
sometimes. Yeah.
and I think it makes sense because so the complicated thing with crystallized sugar is that there are many, many, many different types of it. There is just the white sugar that comes in a bag that you
Hmm.
bake
Hmm.
with, that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. But there are also lots of less refined, rawer forms of sugar. And the complicated thing with that is like there's also highly processed sugar that is made to look like less refined sugar, where it's actually
Mm.
just kind of like dyed or whatever. But
Interesting.
in the
So like
sugar
the
making,
turbinado type of stuff you're talking about?
well, like so I'm not an expert in types of
Yeah.
sugar, but
Yeah.
my understanding is like there's types of turbinado that are basically just like refined sugar that
Died.
is dyed. And then
Mm.
there are types that actually are less refined. But
Okay.
the point being is that during the sugar making process, like sugar goes through stages, and like the first form of sugar that you can get, which is unrefined raw sugar, it doesn't come out pure powdery white. It's brown, it's kind of sticky. It has more character to it,
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
bits of molasses that are still
Right.
kind of in
Right.
there. And so I think I've had rums made from that style of sugar that I wouldn't have known blindfolded. Like I would have just guessed it was a molasses rum.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I do think there are good ways of doing it, but I've also had ones that are terrible,
Hmm.
and that you can kind of they either have no character or they're just straight up bad.
Yeah.
Um,
It just seems harder to
well,
produce a good rum with that as your base.
so it's actually not.
Okay.
I understand where the thought is coming from, but part of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
reason why so many distilleries do this is because molasses is extremely difficult to work with, especially if you're not able to source I want to say like higher quality, like basically less refined molasses. So you see a lot of distilleries talking about like we use grade A molasses. Like what does grade A molasses mean? And there are various definitions of that, but molasses is kind of similar to what I was just talking about with sugar, which
Yeah.
there are various stages of molasses
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
there you can buy like straight up blackstrap, modern blackstrap molasses, which is like the last version of molasses from the sugar refining process.
Right.
It has almost no fermentable sugars left in it. And
Right.
if you went back in time 100 years and looked at blackstrap molasses then, that
It would
wouldn't
be
have been
much.
true.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because basically, the goal of the sugar refining process is to extract as much sugar as possible so they can sell it as
Right.
crystallized sugar.
Right.
It's not to
So
make
they're trying to be efficient.
exactly. It's
Right.
not to make great molasses, but
Hmm.
um, as technology has advanced, sugar
Right.
mills have gotten better and better at taking as
Right.
much sugar as possible out of the molasses. So if you buy straight up blackstrap molasses now, a lot of times it's not going to make very good rum. And so because during fermentation, like you need sugar in fermentation
Yeah.
because sugar is converted into alcohol. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of distilleries that say like we use molasses and we use, some form of
Hmm.
crystallized sugar.
Hmm. Hmm.
And sometimes that's because the molasses that they're able to get just
Isn't.
is very
Yeah.
bad if they just
Hmm.
used 100% that molasses. So
Right.
I'm generalizing a bit, but I'm trying to give people an idea of like why they see that. And I think like crystallized sugar in a lot of cases, it's just like, you know, molasses is thick and sludgy, and I just feel
Hmm.
like it can be easier to kind of deal with. But anyway, that's not to say there aren't distilleries making rum with 100% molasses, because there are a lot of those too. Again, the problem is like you can say like let's say there are 100 distilleries in the US that are doing
Hmm.
100% molasses rum. Like
Hmm.
that's a shitload of distilleries. I mean, they're
Yeah, it is.
small, but it just
Yeah.
numbers wise, that's a lot of distilleries. But
All in
maybe
direct competition for that molasses in a way, right?
sure, possibly, yeah.
Somewhat. Yeah.
But at the same time, like that also might mean there are like 300 distilleries using some form of crystallized cane sugar. So like
Hmm.
I can
Hmm.
say there are a lot using molasses, but it's still like odds are if you try one, there might be more still, even though there are 100,
Yeah.
there might be
Yeah.
more that are using something else. So it's just a very unique category of rum across the world right now, because there just aren't other countries that have something that comparable. Like the closest thing, which isn't really close, it's just kind of close maybe numbers wise, is
Yeah.
how many small tiny rum producers there are in Haiti, for example, making
Mm-hmm.
clairin.
Yeah.
But again, that a completely different style, but it's a similar thing where like there are hundreds of producers, but they're all very small.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see distilleries that stylistically I would say are comparable to what you see in American rum in countries in Europe. So we've
Hmm.
talked about like we had Ninefold from Scotland on here.
Yeah.
Like that is a distillery that I think is comparable to the kind of the style like a lot of distilleries you see in the US. Rummy Club in Amsterdam.
Netherlands. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Netherlands.
Hmm. Hmm.
So like you're starting to see like the craft distillery movement. Kind of Australia is another good example.
Hmm.
But none of those places have the sheer like volume of distilleries that the US does right now. So the US is just even more confusing because there's so many people. um Another thing that I think is a common characteristic is you see a lot of distilleries that, on top of making their own rum, are also sourcing rum in some
Oh yeah.
way. And that's
Yeah.
something you see with craft distilleries. I'm sure, from your bourbon days, you probably ran into this a lot with new distilleries that
MGP. Yeah.
are making bourbon. Yeah. And they're sourcing
Right.
from MGP or
Yeah.
someone else because with whiskey it's tricky because you literally can't sell it as bourbon until it's
Right.
aged. So
Right.
a lot of times to have like they can sell their white whiskey or whatever, but that can be kind of a tough sell for a lot of people.
Hmm.
um Rum is a little different in that you can sell rum, like call something rum and sell it as rum from day one because it doesn't have to be aged. But
Right.
it's still like selling unaged rum can be tough. There's a lot of competition for that.
Right.
And so a lot of places in it, like while their rum is aging, they source rums from the Caribbean. A lot of people work with E&A Shear, places like that, and do their own. You see a lot of places blending their own rum with other
Yeah.
rums from around the world. So that's just kind of an interesting feature I think you see from the category, and can lead to like some pleasant surprises. I've had some interesting rums, that are blends of local distilleries. And a lot of times it's also just, they're sourcing something and putting out a blend. They're almost working a little bit like an independent bottler. So it's just like, it's more rum
Right.
for Americans to have access to. Um,
But
but I
it's
think
not American rum. then,
Yeah, it's
right?
American rum in the sense that, Holmes Key or whatever is, and it's an American company, sourcing
Right.
rums from other places. So,
Right. But just to
um,
distinguish what's being made here as American rum versus what's being offered, I guess you would
exactly.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the last thing I'll say about, big broad picture about American rum, I generally like to tell people that there are two types of distilleries, two types of rum producers in the US. There are rum distilleries and there are distilleries that make rum. So rum distilleries are distilleries that were built to make rum. Like
For the
rum is their
purpose of.
yes, rum, like
Hmm.
they are a rum distillery. Rum
Yeah.
is their primary product. In many cases, it's the only type of spirit they make. Um,
Right.
then there that's probably the minority of rum producers in the US, because the other
Hmm.
type of distillery are distilleries that make rum. So these are distilleries that make a bunch of stuff. Their primary thing
Hmm.
might be whiskey, and maybe they just do a white rum here because, again, that's something they can sell right away.
Immediately.
Um,
Rum and gin,
Immediately.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
rum, gin, vodka.
Vodka.
And
Yeah.
rum is just kind of another spirit for them. So,
Yeah.
that number 5 to 700, I would guess that, 3/4 of that at least are probably distilleries that make rum, while rum distilleries are the smaller, that's like the exceptions basically.
Yeah. That's part of what
And
makes it so hard, I think.
yes,
And it sounds like you're going to follow up and talk about this too. But for me, that's the one that makes it more difficult to start finding the ones that are really taking pride. That's not to say any distillery is going to distill something and hopefully have pride in what they're putting out. But there's a difference there when you start with something in mind, your vision, and you say, we want to do this rather than just like, well, we've got the equipment. Let's just buy some molasses or some sugar and see what happens. Right. And
exactly.
and that's so hard to tell sometimes. Yeah.
And I think like I think most people's minds, they immediately go to, okay, that probably means the rum distilleries are making the good stuff and the distilleries that make rum are making
Yeah.
like
I
forgettable
would
or just
think.
bad stuff.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I would say that like that's mostly true, but there are
Mm-hmm.
also exceptions to that, because
Okay.
I've had rums from rum distilleries, where all they do is rum, and I'm sorry to say,
Not a
sometimes it's
fan.
still
Mm-hmm.
bad. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you
Yeah.
need, you can be passionate
Mm-hmm.
and be
Right.
into it and everything, and it doesn't still always result in good rum. By the same token, I've had rums from distilleries that make rum where it's not their thing at all, and they just happened to have done a really good job.
Yeah.
Like it's not guaranteed that just because it's not their main thing, they won't bring a lot of
Mm-hmm.
skill and knowledge and passion to the table, just as the opposite is true as well. So, that being said, though, I think most of the places that we're going to discuss today are the former category, rum distilleries. So distilleries
Right.
that are built around rum, and there will be some exceptions here and there, but
Yeah.
um,
We'd be
so
here all day if we tried to do them all.
yeah, that's a good point. So we are not going to be able to be comprehensive on this. So
Yeah.
we are going to talk about some specific distilleries, and we can't talk about them all. I already know we're going to leave out some places that we probably should have put in. Some of that will be just because, we can't talk forever. Some of that will just be oversight. There's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So apologies in advance to anyone we didn't mention. Chances are you weren't left out specifically. It was just, we can't talk about everything, but I think we're taking a bias toward things that we have either personally had, or
Right.
things that are maybe we haven't tried but stand out in some way.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
have something notable about them, something that differentiates them from the
Or
crowd.
reputation or
Yeah.
yeah. Availability. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and run through those. Hey Rumcasters! 1 year ago this month, John and I launched the Rumcast Patreon community, which gives listeners a way to not only support the show, but also access bonus episodes, online happy hours we host every month, and we also give them early access to ad-free versions of our standard episodes, like the one you're listening to now. So, to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of the community, we're doing something we haven't done before, which is we are launching annual subscriptions now that allow you to save 10% of the yearly cost. So it's basically like giving yourself a month free plus a little extra. So if you want to check that out, if you want to join the almost 100 listeners now who have already come along for the ride, you can head to patreon.com/therumcast. That's patreon.com/therumcast to check it out. We'd love to see you there. Now back to the show.
All right, so we're back to talk about American rum producers here. And Will, one of the things that I start thinking of when I even try to tackle this and how many there are, like we talked about, is how do we even begin to approach this in a way that will make sense? So we're not just jumping around the map everywhere or just going from place to place. Have you thought about that so far?
Yeah, I think kind of what I suggest with people, or I guess kind of the way I've started to think about American rum, because we talked earlier about how there's not really an American style. I mentioned I don't really think there ever is going to be an American style like the way that there is, a Barbados style, a Jamaican style. What I do think you might have a chance of seeing, decades from now are distinctive regional styles.
Right.
And the way that I think about like rum regions in the United States, I kind of think about three categories. So there are the first category is like places that have access to sugar cane,
like actual cane fields
yes.
and growing cane themselves, or it's nearby.
Exactly. Either they're growing it, someone near is growing it, or there is a sugar industry.
Right.
So these places, a place with industry
that limits you, right, to only certain regions. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Warm places, coastal places. So Louisiana, that's really the biggest sugarcane region in the US in terms of amount of sugarcane grown, and it actually still has a very large sugar refining industry. So distilleries there a lot of times have access to they can get easier access to better quality molasses, better quality raw sugar products, juice in some cases. Hawaii is another place. There is no sugar industry anymore in Hawaii. They used to have mills and everything. I believe the last mill closed several years ago, I want to say, within the last 10 years, I think. But there are producers growing sugarcane now because the climate is pretty perfect for it. And there's a history of sugarcane there. It was actually brought there. It's not what's like
native, indigenous.
Yeah. Is it endemic?
Endemic, yeah.
One of those things. Like sugarcane didn't start out growing in Hawaii, but it was brought there and went on to flourish. So and then you also just see kind of smaller little random places pop up here and there. Florida, obviously good environment for sugarcane. You see some people doing stuff with it there. Georgia, really just one producer in Georgia, to my knowledge, but we'll talk about that. And you see all sorts of random places. I saw a place like in, I want to say Nevada, that was growing a small amount of sugarcane, and Alabama too, South Alabama. There's, you'll actually still see little stands and stuff for advertising cane syrup and stuff if you drive around in South Alabama. But
Guarapo here.
It's
called
Guarapo.
Guarapo.
So places that have cane is one region. The other region I would say is places that have kind of a rum tradition of sorts. And so the one for that in the United States would be New England, just because, during the colonial era, there were tons of rum distilleries, hundreds of rum distilleries in New England. Lots of rum was made there. And really rum production continued, like it got a lot smaller, but even through the early 20th century, there was still rum being made there. New England rum was an actual category defined in the US Code of Regulations. Funnily enough, it did not have to be made in New England. There were distilleries. There were distilleries.
New England rum didn't have to be made in New England. Is that what you just told me?
No, it basically became kind of like a marketing tool because people, like, New England rum was a brand. It had a reputation, not just in the US, but various places around the world.
I think you just gave Richard Seal a heart attack just from that.
you can find there were distilleries in Kentucky, that were primarily whiskey distilleries in the 20th century that were also making rum and selling it as New England rum branded stuff. I think the only requirement like to be labeled New England rum. I think it had to be made in the US, and there was a proof limit of the rum coming off the still. I want to say it was like somewhere in the 180s or something like that. Like it can't
Okay.
proof can't be higher than this. So you
Hmm.
couldn't do like the super 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 light style rum and it be New England rum, but you could make it anywhere in the US. But so anyway, the New England distilleries do have kind of that I guess historical cachet of New England rum. So that's the other one. And then lastly are just like the exceptions. So there are obviously rum is made in tons of places outside of those places, and you'll find some high quality rums made outside those places, but they're not really
Right.
like a lot of listeners will probably have heard of Montagna because they've been around for a long
Hmm.
time. They have distribution internationally. Karen
Hmm.
Hoskin is very present at rum events, rum festivals, and things like that. Like they're made in Colorado, in the mountains, and
Yeah.
they can kind of define their own style of Colorado rum or like Rocky Mountain rum, whatever they want to call it. But it's not like
They're
there's
the only game in town, right?
exactly. It's not
Yeah.
like, I mean, there are other distilleries in Colorado making rum, but they're kind of doing their own thing more so,
Hmm.
I think, than these places that either have historical ties, or they are distilleries all using like locally sourced stuff from the same place. To me, that's more where a style can coalesce around. But so we kind of
Hmm.
want to jump around some of
Right.
these categories. We're going to talk about some of the distilleries in places that have the cane, some in places that have the New England, rum,
History.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And then also places that are exceptions to those. So just places that we've either tried outside of those regions, or that are notable in some way to talk about. And so I think the first place we want to tackle is we're going to go
Yeah.
as far west as possible and
Hmm.
start in Hawaii. And as you said, we have an episode on Kohana rum, so we won't talk too much about everything going on there. But I do think there's kind of a through line with Hawaiian distilleries. There's several there. We're going to talk about three, but there are more than three. But kind of what holds them all together, you see a lot of use of local heirloom sugarcane, for
Yeah.
cane juice rums. You also see people investing in sugarcane product, like local sugarcane production, with kind of the hope of recovering access to local sugarcane byproducts. So more
Yeah.
refined sugar products, people that aren't using juice. But
I feel like with Hawaiian rums, my impression of them is they take their cane seriously. So the sugar cane that's being produced there is not for the sugar industry. It's specifically for the purpose of making rum, right? And just local use, I guess.
that's my understanding. One of the distilleries we'll talk about is Kaloa, which is the one out of the three we're going to mention that isn't using cane juice.
Okay.
And they started in 2009, and I believe when they started, they still had access to local Hawaiian sugar, and they're using some form of crystallized sugar to make their
Hmm.
rums. They're not using
Hmm.
molasses, to my knowledge. And so they were using that, like they could say, they're using Hawaiian sugarcane
Right.
products to make their rum. But when that mill closed, they had a finite amount, left over, and so they're going to
Yeah.
run out of it at some point. Um, their CEO Bob Gunther, he has a background in the sugar industry in Hawaii. I don't remember
Mm.
specifically what he did, but I know in the last 5 years or so, they've made substantial investments not only in planting their own sugar cane, but also working with farmers locally who are gonna, grow some sugar cane for them. And their goal is to be able to eventually get back to using 100%, Hawaiian cane, for whatever kind of crystallized sugar they're using for their rum. So that will obviously involve having to refine it in some way. So I don't know if
Yeah.
they're like building, or like we see that in Barbados right now. Mount Gay just built their own sugar mill.
That's right. Yeah.
So they can make their own molasses, which again, you can't just take juice and turn it into molasses without having the equipment to make sugar. So
Right.
um you kind of also have to make sugar if you want to do that. So
But
yeah,
then
so I don't
doesn't
know.
that
I don't know if they have plans also to like sell,
do a molasses
sugar
farming?
beyond just
Oh,
making
okay.
rum.
Yeah, yeah.
Because like Worthy Park, for example, like they make all their own molasses, but
Right.
they sell, bagged
Sugar.
crystallized
Yeah.
sugar. So they're
Yeah.
also in the sugar business. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they have plans for that or not. To my knowledge, they don't, but they could, just because again, I know they're not using juice. So maybe they're going to use all that crystallized sugar to make their rum. I'm not entirely sure, but on the other hand, Kohana and Kuleana Rum Works, the other two we're going to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
they're making cane juice rums, and your point is exactly correct. Like they are cultivating, growing sugarcane just for the purpose of making rum.
Mm-hmm.
They're not interested in turning any of it into sugar, to my knowledge. So yeah, there's a focus on sugarcane production is like directly tied to rum there.
Right. Right, which makes it a kind of a, it's not unique, but it's a special case there where it feels like it's really a part of their local process, their focus, I guess, for those two.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And you'll also see, I know Kohana and Kuleana both are working with heirloom varietals of sugarcane. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
these are, older styles of sugarcane that weren't bred specifically for making, processed crystallized sugar. Um, which those varietals have been kind of
Yeah.
cultivated specifically just for the purpose of like maximizing sugar production over the years. The kind they're using were not like that. So
Right.
I think that's the main contrast between them, is also sugarcane varietals. Like we mentioned, we had an episode with Kohana. Their whole philosophy is they want to work with a bunch of different varietals, but every rum they produce is from a single sugarcane varietal, so that people can taste the
Mm-hmm.
differences in
Mm-hmm.
the various types of sugarcane, or as they call it.
Yeah.
Um, Kuleana is a little bit of a different approach. They are using heirloom varietals, but they're less concerned with like, we're going to isolate everything where it's just like the different cane, and
Yeah.
so you can
Yeah.
taste all the different varietals. They're actually doing a lot of blending. Like they do have a bottling of their own fresh cane juice rum. I think they've done some small aged releases here and there. But they also, like, they have a white rum that's a blend of their own rum and rum from New Guinea and rum from Martinique. So I think that's allowed them to kind of like scale things up, because
Hmm.
it's tough making cane juice rum. It's expensive, and when you're starting out, like trying to do everything from that can be difficult. So I think
Yeah.
that's allowed them to kind of like have a bunch of different products, and that kind of thing. But so they're taking kind of an interesting approach. And then
Right.
um, I think Kaloa is a very different approach, where I think their rums are geared a little bit more to like a mass audience. They're not cane juice rums. They have a standard unaged rum, but they also do like a lot of flavored rums. Like,
Yeah. I've
they
seen a
have,
lot of those.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
coconut rum. They have a dark rum that's like very, very, dark, like has added, stuff to it.
Mm-hmm.
The coconut rum is actually like pretty good for a flavored rum. Like I'm not a huge flavored rum guy, but
Mm-hmm.
like it's one of the better coconut rums that I've had. And then they do have like a reserve aged rum. I believe it's now aged for a minimum of 5 years. So I think once you see American rum distilleries starting to get to those 5 year age statements, that's when they've
Yeah.
really like been around for a little while. Like it's actually pretty uncommon to find rum that old. Most of the stuff you see is going to be less than 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
That actually should have been another characteristic when we were talking about that. Is just rums tend to be younger because places are young and small,
Right.
and they can't afford to just sit on huge quantities of rum for years and years. So
Right.
yeah,
Well,
that's kind of,
you
yeah.
mentioned also that so Kaloa has been around for a while. They're back in 2009 that they
Mhm.
started, so they've had some time. Whereas Kohana and Kuleana are both, what, 10 years ish.
Yeah, about 10 years.
Yeah. And another difference I think is worth mentioning also about Kohana Kuleana. I'm not sure where Kaloa is located, but Kohana and Kuleana are both on different islands in Hawaii. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Kohana is on Oahu, Kuleana is on the Big Island, and
Mm-hmm.
Kaloa is actually on Kauai. So
Oh,
they
okay.
are all on
Yeah.
different islands. So basically, and there is at least one distillery, possibly more, on Maui. which again, we can't get to everything, but
Yeah, yeah.
basically, if you are taking a trip to Hawaii, odds are you are going to be on an island that has a rum distillery. So, well, look them up in advance, and I think I know the three that we just mentioned are all places you can visit. So,
Hmm.
definitely look into that. But yeah, so Hawaii is one of those places that I think just has some interesting stuff going on, and kind of you could see a style of Hawaiian rum
Hmm.
developing, over the
Hmm.
next several decades, to where, yeah, they're all different and you can find some different stuff, but like you can kind of like recognize some characteristics in common.
Hmm.
Going back to the cane source, I think. So the next place like that, Louisiana, I think kind of like I was saying earlier, defining characteristics here is you just see a lot of places using local sugarcane products, whether it is juice that they're growing or sourcing, or it's 100% local molasses, which
Hmm.
one advantage that some distilleries have in Louisiana is they, since they're close, to a lot of the mills, it's easier for them to work directly with the mills.
Right.
And so I know of at least one distillery that is able to get a less refined molasses, specifically because like they're local and like the mill doesn't mind kind of going to a little extra
Yeah.
trouble to get it to them. So whereas if you're farther away, it could be harder to get that
Right.
kind of
Well, if
thing.
they have a steady business deal, then it makes sense for the mill to say, okay, we'll be a little less efficient in our process to give you what you're looking for because
Hmm.
we know you're going to buy it.
Yeah.
So then that makes sense, just reaching out and having that, cooperative there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll start with a distillery that probably, I don't know if they have the most international distribution of any of these younger American rum distilleries, but they're definitely in the running for having the most,
Hmm.
both within the United States and outside the United States, and that's Bayou. So I think that's one that people are likely to have encountered just in stores or seen it online or something like that. But they started
Yeah.
in 2013. It's all, to my knowledge, pot distilled. They're one of the distilleries that, as I was saying earlier, they use a combination of molasses and what I think is crystallized sugar. The other thing that can be frustrating about the crystallized sugar thing is that you'll see a ton of websites that just say like, we use local American sugar cane to make our rum, and it's like, okay, well, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what
But you left out a key detail
like
there.
what
Yeah.
byproduct of sugar, like it makes it sound
Yeah.
like it's a very like agricultural product, which to an extent it is, that they're using
Yeah.
stuff locally made here, but
There's a few
I
steps between that, though. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right, right, a few steps removed from the farm
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So I believe they're using molasses and crystallized sugar, and they have a pretty broad line of always available rums at this point. They have an unaged rum, they have a reserve rum that's aged 2 to 5 years. They have kind of a single batch series that I think usually has an age statement. The
Hmm.
current one that's on their website is 5 years old. It was aged in California wine casks. So usually there's some, cask differentiator there. And then they also have one called XO Mardi Gras that's aged up to 5 years. And then they finish it in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. And then they have like some spiced and flavored rums. But I wanted to bring them up just because I think they're one of the few American rum distilleries that really does have wide distribution
Yeah.
and has
Yeah. They're on almost
scaled.
every shelf. Yeah.
Yeah, they've scaled pretty quickly. I believe they are either majority. I think they're majority owned by Stoli Group now, which is
Mm.
part of a big spirits conglomerate. So they've had
Hmm.
some investment. I know they have some international distribution and things like that. My experience with their rum is limited. Like I bought one of their aged rums several years ago, and it was fine. It wasn't. It certainly wasn't bad, but it
Hmm.
wasn't like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like I haven't gone back and bought other bottles. But that can also be the thing with these distilleries, is like they started in 2013, so what they're making now may be significantly different from what I had, 3 or 4 years ago when I tried their
Yeah.
rum for the first time, because a lot of these places, they're refining their processes, they're learning,
Right.
they're doing different things. And so you can
And there's that
see.
lag, right? With the aged products, there's that lag of it's not going to get to you for a while with the changes they've implemented. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's a good point. Hmm.
Exactly. So that's another thing I would say is like if you tried something several years ago, use your impression of that as a reference point, but I would say like don't hold that distillery to that forever. They might, improve
Yeah.
down the line. So yeah, that's the first one. The other non-cane juice distillery I'll talk about is Relaison, which I've mentioned on the podcast before.
Hmm.
They are a really small distillery in New Orleans, started in 2016, all 100% pot still. They're the rum nerds distillery is how I like to describe them, because they're doing stuff with dunder and muck. Their rum is very funky, but it's like it's not a funk like you've had in other rums. I guess
Cool.
it's like
Yeah.
a New Orleans funk basically.
Yeah.
But they're one of the distilleries that's using 100% local molasses. I believe they get it directly from a mill. They do an interesting thing where they actually do two different fermentations with
Hmm.
two different types of yeasts, and one of
Ooh.
those yeasts is a Brettanomyces yeast, which is sometimes referred to as Brett. It's something you see a lot in beer, actually,
Oh,
like kind of sour, funky beers. But
interesting.
so you don't see it very often in rum at all.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty unique thing. So basically, they do those fermentations, and then they can blend the results of those in their rum. So they
Huh.
have an unaged rum, they have an overproof unaged rum, which the overproof is not just the unaged rum at higher strength. It's actually it's different. So I think it's like a different percentage of the various fermentations that go in there. It's kind of like a different mark, basically, if you're
Right.
going to
Right.
compare it to
Hmm.
Jamaica, for example. And then they have a bunch of like all their aged releases are just single barrel. So again, they don't have like that flagship, like here's our 2 year old aged rum release, that is always available. Everything is single barrel. Again, it's very, very small.
Yeah.
I visited there for the first time last year, and you walk in and like you turn your left, you turn your right, like you see the whole distillery. But it's really cool. I'd encourage people, if you're going to New Orleans, they do tours, so schedule a visit. They're really cool, and they love rum, so they're
Yeah.
rum people. They also did a one-off cane juice rum a few years ago that I was really impressed with, and they just don't do it consistently, just because getting access to that fresh juice is just difficult when you're not growing the
Yeah.
cane yourself.
This is the one of most of the ones we're going to talk about today. This is the one that makes me the most jealous of you.
Oh.
Um, I feel like I want this product to be nearby and available in Florida. And to your point of them being still small and still kind of
Mm-hmm.
recent, it just I guess they're just not there yet with the wider distribution. But I'm so curious and interested to try some of the stuff that they're doing that you just talked about. And it just seems a fun, like you said, geeky kind of
Yeah.
rum nerdy kind of project that really speaks to me. So I'm hoping that it makes its way down sometime soon, or I make my way up to it, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And again, that's one of the, I want to say, like, frustrations of the category for consumers, is just like so much of this stuff it's just hard to get your hands on it, because it's so
Yeah.
regional, production is so small, and they do have some distribution outside of Louisiana. I think they're in Chicago. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not gonna
Hmm. Hmm.
say, but I mean, the other thing is also just like production capacity limitations. Like
Right.
they are using like tiny pot, like they basically have like five, I think five, 4 or 5 like tiny pot stills all in a row in a room. So like there's only so much rum that they can make, and they're doing slightly longer fermentation. So, it takes time
Mm-hmm.
and everything. So,
Yeah.
um, but it's a frustration of the category, but also what makes it a little bit fun is just like the hunt, like trying to, hunt these things down.
Yeah.
When you get it, it feels like a special experience sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and then real quickly, I don't want to take forever on all of this, but a few more we'll mention. The last three are places that are all doing cane juice rum at various degrees, and two of them are doing some molasses rum as well. One is Oxbow rum, which was also formerly called Three Roll, and
Yeah.
before it was Three Roll, it was Cane Land. So like
Yeah.
they've been through
Yeah.
some
Some
iterations, but
rebranding. Yeah.
yeah. They started in 2016. It's pretty unique. I don't think there's another distillery like this in the US even at all, but it's
Hmm.
owned by the family that owns the Alma sugar mill and farms. So again, they've been in the sugar business for a long time, and
Hmm.
just recently, so they have access to sugarcane, they have access to molasses, because again, they're milling their own sugar, like they sell actual sugar. So they've got access to like every type of, you know, byproduct to come off of the sugarcane plant. And so everything they do is, estate grown. They do cane juice rums. They also do molasses rums. They have unaged cane juice and molasses rums. And I think they have a 2-year-old aged molasses rum. And I actually, when I did the ACSA judging last year, their unaged molasses rum was one of the rums that was in that competition. And of course, this was all blind, so we didn't know. But that rum scored the highest of everything we had. And I think the reaction was pretty universal among the judges. I think there was one who wasn't as high on it as the others were. But I was really impressed. Like really good fruity characteristics, and like there was some talk at the table of like maybe this is a Jamaican rum because like sourced products could be entered into that competition. So that was an impressive blind tasting experience there. So, and again, that relationship of just being part of a sugar mill is unique in American rum. So they have access to a lot of stuff, can do a lot of interesting things there. The next one is one I've discussed on the podcast before, which is Cherami rum, part of Porch Jam Distillery. That distillery started out making vodka, but in 2018 they
realized the error of their ways, and
well, they hired Jason Zeno in 2018. He's their distiller now, and the first thing he wanted to do was we've got to do a cane juice rum. So they make it seasonally with the harvest season. They do not grow the cane themselves. It's a pretty unique sourcing method. They drive a big tanker truck about an hour and a half or so west, I believe, of New Orleans, and they get fresh juice directly from a sugar mill that agreed to sell it to them. So they just back their truck in. The juice empties out into this big tank on the back of the truck. They drive it back as quickly as possible to the distillery and start distilling it right away. So it's not a mobile distillery, but there's a mobile method like aspect of it.
Is there a temperature control that they would do during that? Does it need to be cooled, or
the tank is not temperature controlled? And they actually, like, fermentation does start a little bit in the tank on the way back. I think they put a little bit of a yeast starter in there because it's going to start kind of fermenting anyway. So I think that allows them to control it a little bit. But their goal
is fermented on the move.
Nice. But so like they want to get back as quickly as possible and get the juice into their fermenters. And I believe they do temperature control at the distillery. I wrote a whole article about it, I should know, but so like they want a fairly controlled fermentation. They're not trying to do a bunch of like wild crazy stuff going on. So once it gets back to the distillery, pretty standard. Then they do a pot distillation and a column distillation. They've released an unaged rum so far. Then they've also done like a standard unaged rum. They also do Queen Share rum there as well. So they've done some unaged releases of that, and they have a bunch of rum aging. I like their approach because they're using all 53-gallon barrels. So they're built. They're not a massive distillery, but they are much larger and have the capacity for making more rum than the vast majority of the distillers we're talking about. Like they're set up to produce a lot, and they have a lot aging. And actually, I think at Rum Congress, didn't you taste a little age sample of their stuff? And
I think so.
I think you had a pretty favorable reaction to it, if I'm remembering.
I really enjoyed it. Yes, that was really good. And the other thing I remember about Cherami was seeing a few recent posts online on social media that people are starting to find it in different states now. So Illinois, I don't remember if it was Minnesota or something. I don't want to say it wrong either. I did notice that there were people saying, "Hey, look what I found on the shelf," and it was that bottle of, I believe it was an unaged Cherami rum.
It's got like a green label on it. That's their standard. And the rum that they make for aging like is actually different from that. So like they make a rum that is for bottling unaged, and then they configure the still slightly differently for the rum that they're going to age. And if you taste that rum unaged next to the stuff that they bottle unaged. The
Hmm.
other stuff that is made for aging, it's a little bit more robust. It's got a little bit more funk to it. I think
Mm-hmm.
to kind of stand up to the
Right.
barrel.
Right.
So it's just kind of cool. Like they're doing a lot of different stuff, and yeah, I like what they're doing a lot. The last one I'll mention, Sugarfield Spirits. So they started in 2019. They do like a combination of molasses slash raw cane sugar based rum. It's all sourced in Louisiana. But they've
Hmm.
also done some small cane juice batches as well. And they kind of started out growing some and milling it themselves, but it was just, I think, kind of too much work. Like, I think like economically it wasn't really feasible to continue doing that. So they are able to still, they're sourcing juice from a mill. I can't remember which one, and they're still doing some juice products. And I actually just got to try this for the first time. I connected with their owner and distiller, and he sent me some stuff. They're doing a lot of aging in different cask types. Like he sent me some
Okay.
cane juice rum that was aged in a white port barrel, some aged in a red port barrel, and it's solid stuff.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued, to see what they do, but yeah, very very enthusiastic and experimenting with a lot of different stuff, which is kind of like the fun stuff that you can run into in this category.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I don't think I see. I mean, it does exist, but I don't think I see as much of the finished in a cask type of things from American rum producers. At least maybe this is the only one, like you said, in Louisiana. Maybe. Well, no. Yeah, I guess as I'm kind of talking it out with you, I'm like, well, that one, well, that one. So they are out there, but at the same time, I also don't feel like it's taken over as part of their line. Probably because they're still young and getting their own identity. They don't want to start pushing stuff out that is influencing them in different ways just yet. Whereas if you look at something from Jamaica or Barbados, say they've got such a standard profile that now they're starting to just see how other casks affect that, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think you see it a fair amount. I think like a lot of these rum producers, like kind of what you're saying, knowing what your style is can lead
Hmm.
you to experiment with it, but also not knowing what your style is can lead you to experiment a lot in some cases because you may want to try it in ex bourbon casks, or you may want to try it in new American oak, or you may want to try it in, an ex wine barrel.
Yeah.
So I think you do see a fair amount of it. But yeah, I think as rum fans we always like seeing,
Yeah.
stuff done in different cast types and experimentation and things like
Yeah.
that. So
For me,
um
before we move on, Louisiana is kind of the one, the up and coming, or I don't want to even say up and coming, but the most interesting things I think right now in American rum are kind of happening in Louisiana. That's not to discount all of what Hawaii is doing, which I think
mhm.
is really good things there, and some of the others we're going to talk about as well coming up. But there's just something about that area right now that it almost feels like an organic renaissance, something happening, which is kind of cool.
Well, and I think that's a byproduct of sugarcane being there. Again,
Mm,
it's like it's there, you have access to different stuff, and it's just on your mind. We're in
mm-hmm.
Louisiana, what should we make? Well, we have sugarcane. And like Relays On, for example, their founders, one of their founders, I think is from or went to school. I think he's from Louisiana originally, but their distiller is not from Louisiana. But when they decided to start a distillery, a rum distillery, they were like, we got to move to Louisiana, because like why would we do it anywhere else? Let's do it
Mm,
somewhere where we can like be near
yeah.
sugarcane, near the
And
mills and everything. So yeah, I think it
in the
definitely
place where it's
attracts a lot of
happening.
interesting
Hmm.
stuff.
Mm,
Um,
cool.
so the last few we'll talk about, as I said, there's other places where sugarcane grows. We want to talk about a couple in Georgia and Florida. So Georgia, this is another distillery that I think is probably like high on the list of just American rum distilleries that people are likely to have heard of. They've been around for a while. I think they've gotten, a lot of, positive reception and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
Richland Rum in Georgia, they started in 2011. They grow their own cane. I think it's just about as far north as you can go in the US and still reasonably grow
Mm,
sugarcane.
hmm.
But it's kind of a unique setup because I was talking about, Cherami in Louisiana, they only distill during the harvest season, or at least they only get juice during the harvest season. The harvest season
Right.
in Louisiana is about, I want to say October or November until early to mid January. So it's pretty small. It's not like the Caribbean, where sugarcane can be harvested much greater percentage of the year than just that. At Richland in Georgia, it's an even smaller window. And so instead of working with just fresh juice, they heat the juice and condense it into cane syrup, which is shelf stable. So unlike
Right.
juice, which you have to distill pretty quickly or it's going to spoil, if you condense it into cane syrup, you can store it and still, once harvest season is over, you still have stuff to distill. So it's basically like, it wouldn't be feasible for them to only distill like 1 or 2 months out of the year, basically.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
they do a cane syrup rum. All their aging is in new American oak. They've also done a few special cask release, like they've done a port cask. They've actually done some beer casks as well, which
Yeah,
is
that's the ones I was thinking of earlier too. Yeah, I was
yeah,
like, oh
yeah.
yeah, that's right. Those. Yep.
Everything is single cask. You can actually look up your cask online to get the details. Like they put the cask number on the bottle and you can find the specific cask on their website. And but generally they're all, what they bottle now is all about 4 to 5 years old. And we've had some disagreements between ourselves
I was
about
wondering if you're
Richland.
going to bring this
Yeah,
up.
of course we gotta bring it up. I'm a fan of what they do. I've had several of their rums. I've had their standard aged rum. I've had a cask strength one. I've had their port rum, and I enjoyed all of them to varying degrees. I thought it was
Hmm.
I really like their approach, first of all, and it's all it's pot still rum. I believe they use kind of the kind of Charente style, swan neck
Mm-hmm.
stills.
Mm-hmm.
But so I really like their approach, and to me, the rum lives up to it. It's good, it's quality, and it's one of the, like, if I'm gonna introduce a rum enthusiast to American rum, like I think Richland for me would be in the lineup.
Yeah, I just I'm probably in the minority here. And if anybody listening has listened to this podcast for a long time, I don't like talking negatively about almost any rum in general because I'm such a fan of just the category and I want everybody to succeed. And to your point, I do know a lot of people will that like Richland rum. For
Mm.
me, I'm not sure if it's one of two things, and this is just going by memory. I haven't tried it recently
Uh-huh.
in the recent past, but it's either the cane syrup rums that I'm just not a fan of because I've had
Mm-hmm.
others that there's something in the cane syrup approach that gives it a quality that I don't seem to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So it just could be my own subjective thing about cane syrup rums, and I need to try to expand that to see if that's what it is. Or the other thing that may come to mind is the casks. Sometimes you get this kind of mustiness from a cask, and it
Mm-hmm.
feels like every time I've had a Richland rum, I get that mustiness from it that I'm
Interesting.
not as much of a fan of.
Well,
So
and it
I'm
is
not
all
sure.
single
Yeah.
cask. So it's like if you've tried it, 2 or 3 times, you're still only getting single casks and
Mm,
the casks differ. So it could be
right.
that, or it could just be that it's not for you, which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's one that I recommend people trying and seeking out. And yeah,
What I
it's
do like from them is they do higher ABVs also, right?
yeah, they
I'm
do
trying
some
to
cast strength
remember.
stuff, and
Yeah,
like
some cast strength. Yeah.
their standard aged bottling, I believe, is bottled at 43%
Right.
ABV,
Right.
yeah, ABV. So it's not just the standard 80 proof. Yeah.
I do like that, and I think that they have a good singular approach. And I have to agree with you that when you're talking to somebody who knows nothing about American rum,
Mhm.
that kind of Richland does need to be in the conversation.
Yeah, we agree there.
Yeah.
So moving on, Florida. This is kind of to round out our places growing sugarcane. Florida has one place that I know of that is growing sugarcane. I have not had the chance to try their rum yet. Maybe you could be you're our Florida correspondent down
Yeah.
there, John. So this is Sugar Sand Distillery. They started in 2017. They're located in Lake Placid, Florida, which I don't know where that is. When I hear Lake Placid, I just think of the movie from the late 90s.
With the alligator.
Yeah, with the alligator, which took place in New York. I
New
think that was like
York,
upstate New
that's
York.
Lake
Yeah,
Placid, New York. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So just more of the, New York to
Yeah.
Florida connection. But
It's Central Florida, I believe.
okay.
Yeah.
So they've got about 10 acres of sugar cane. They do a fresh cane juice rum, unaged and aged bottling. And again, I wish I had more to say about it, but I bring it up just because I think anytime someone in the US is growing their own sugar cane and making rum, like it's notable. It's worth, being like, hey,
Yeah.
this place exists too. So wanted to bring that up. But
I,
what I mean, John, you're bouncing around all over there down in Florida. You're part of the Florida Rum Society. You're Mr. Miami. So what else is going, like Florida? As we learned at Miami Rum Congress, one of the presentations was talking about how like Florida is maybe like the number one selling rum state in
right.
in the US, not just of American rum, but like all rum. A lot of
And
rum is sold in Florida. So like
exactly.
what's going on from a production standpoint down there?
Well,
What like
it, so I was going to say number two is that it's also the number two state for cane production behind Louisiana.
right, right,
So,
right, right.
and if I recall correctly, it's not super far off in terms of volume. So it's not like Louisiana's 80 and Florida's 20 and everybody else. It's closer to like 60-40 in that region, somewhere around
Oh,
there.
interesting.
So Florida does produce a lot of cane and sugar itself.
Mhm.
That said, there's also quite a few rum distilleries that are small in Florida as well. And I would not be able to speak very knowingly about most of them.
Mhm.
There's a couple that I know. First of all, I was going to say with Sugar Sand, I'm not really familiar with them and I'm really interested in them. So,
Mhm.
like you said, hopefully I can find that nearby somewhere and try some of them. I just looked up Lake Placid, by the way. It is a little more south of where I thought it would be. So it's south of
Okay.
Orlando, right in the middle of the state,
Okay.
but above Lake Okeechobee. So
Okay.
it's in that range of like central to south. The two that came to mind that I wanted to kind of mention, number one is Wicked Dolphin, which
Mhm.
is pretty ubiquitous down here, and I think they've
Oh,
got
interesting.
fairly wide distribution
Okay.
amongst other states. They're Cape Coral, Florida. They've been in since 2012, so like you said, about 10 or 11 years now for
Mhm.
most of these that are the older ones. But they do quite a bit. They are a copper pot still. And all Florida sugar. So
Mhm.
they say they're using they bill themselves as a true Florida rum in the
Okay.
sense that they're using Florida sugar, Florida, I believe it's Florida brown sugar and molasses that they're
Mhm.
using together. They make a silver rum, which is fairly unique in terms of it being an aged and filtered white rum in that
Right.
way. And then they also have a bunch of flavored rums, which are fairly standard for down here. But the ones that are interesting are, and I think we mentioned this recently, they have a bottled in bond
Yeah.
rum.
Uh-huh.
So that's
I remember seeing
aged,
that.
yeah, aged 6 years, 50% ABV, and they age all their stuff on site.
Mhm.
So
Well, and seeing, bottled and bond, I believe what has to be aged minimum of 4 years, right? If I'm remembering
yes,
correctly.
yeah,
So
yep,
seeing a 6 year age statement rum, again, pretty uncommon. So that's notable in and of itself. And then you also mentioned the white rum, which is aged and then filtered, which, although that is very common across the broader rum world, pretty
hmm
uncommon. There's one other distillery we're going to talk about that does that, but almost nobody in the US does that, where they put their rum in a barrel and then take it out, filter the color out, and bottle it, and as like a white or a silver or what have you rum. Usually
right,
those white or silver rums are going to be unaged. Like maybe they rest briefly in a tank or something like that, but they don't touch barrels. They're just unaged rums basically. So,
hmm
and even though that's super common in other countries, like part of the reason it's uncommon here is again what we've talked about. Like these places need to sell their rum quickly, so putting it in a cask for a year or two and then filtering out the color is just such like a financial commitment that
yeah.
it's not worth it for a lot of places. So it's always interesting to me when I see distilleries that do go to the trouble to make that investment.
Yeah, agreed. There's one more I wanted to mention for Florida, which
Hmm.
is Lugo's Distillery.
Okay.
And with Florida Rum Society, we had the chance to talk with them and try a few of their rums. So that's why I know a little bit more about them.
Hmm.
They're a family owned in fairly recent, I think only a few years that they've been doing this now in Lakeland, Florida. But the family comes from the Puerto Rican tradition. So they actually make a pitoro.
Hmm. Yeah.
So the Pitoro is the high ABV unaged rum
Hmm.
that they have. They also have an aged rum they've aged for a year.
Okay.
It's fairly dark for an aged rum 1 year, so
Okay.
I'm not sure how that's being produced all the way through there, but they do have it. And then they have a spiced rum that for a person like myself who doesn't really care for spiced rums very much, I have to say I enjoyed this one,
It's
and I
pretty
think
good. Yeah.
they're trying to do it right.
Uh-huh.
So that's nice. I like that they also have a higher than the standard 40% ABV on a lot of their releases. And I'm excited to see what else they're continuing to work on. Why I wanted to point them out also was just to talk about, we're talking about these regional kind of things. Florida's a weird state, Will.
Mhm.
Florida has like South Florida, and then it's got Central Florida, and then it's got like North Florida. And those three things are not quite alike exactly. Even though we're all that one state of Florida,
Right.
man, it really feels like you're in a different place once you pass, I want to say like Palm Beach County down here. It starts
Uh-huh.
to really shift in culture. And then if you go north of Tampa or there, it starts to shift again into that more southern kind of Georgia,
Mhm.
Louisiana, Alabama type of area. So the point there is I don't think there's really anything coalescing around a Florida rum style
Mhm.
at all because of these things like Lugos, who has this tradition and they're kind of doing the more Puerto Rican thing, and then Wicked Dolphin doing their own thing,
Yep.
and then these others that are doing their own thing. So there's not really anything quite yet that I would point to saying Florida is starting to identify yet.
Yeah.
But they do have a lot going on. Yeah.
I grew up for a large part of my childhood in Alabama, taking vacations down to the Gulf Coast down there. Sometimes
Mhm.
beaches in Alabama, sometimes beaches in Florida. And I'd always tell people North Florida is just South Alabama, pretty much, like
Yeah.
culturally.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I, I haven't been everywhere in North Florida, but certainly parts that are basically a
Mhm.
lot like Alabama to me. So yeah, good point. And you brought up the spice rum. I will say, like, people know neither of us are huge spiced rum people, but a lot of times you see these smaller distilleries that are using local ingredients and stuff like that. You see some pretty decent spiced rum products out there from a lot of these distilleries.
Mhm.
I meant to mention when we were talking about Cherami, Porch Jam. They don't make a spiced rum, but a distiller I know who has a company called Liba Spirits, a guy named Colton Weinstein and his partner Devin, they basically travel around doing products at different distilleries and then releasing it under their own brand. They did a spiced slash botanical rum at Porch Jam with molasses, not with the cane juice, and
Yeah.
it's called Lafcadio, and it's another example of like it's a really interesting. It's 80 proof. It's not sweetened. They use like bay leaf and a lot of kind of like unconventional stuff in it.
Oh, wow.
So you do see some really interesting infused, spiced, like whatever you want to call them. You do see some interesting stuff like that coming out here. So yeah, just something to note. But with all that said, I think we're ready to move on to our second region. And these next few, I think, will be quicker. I think those we had a lot to say about the places with the cane, but New England. So actually, as I was sort of preparing our outline for this episode, I was like, I actually don't know what New England technically, like what states comprise New England. Do you know what states comprise New England, John?
Yes, just the ones that comprise New England. I'm buying myself time to think about this. No, I honestly don't. I know it's going to be Massachusetts. I
Yeah.
know what I feel like it is. I'm going to
Yes,
talk
it's what
is
it is and what you feel like it is, right?
yes,
And they're different
is
things.
right. Vermont, New Hampshire,
Uh-huh.
Delaware, and
Delaware's not in
Massachusetts.
there. Delaware's not in there.
Really?
So
Rhode Island?
yes,
Okay,
it's six
okay.
states: Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. In my mind, though, I always lumped like pretty much the entire Northeast is like New
Yeah,
England,
like
because like that's the one part of the country I haven't spent that much time in. So like I've been to New York, I've been to Boston, yeah, but I haven't really been to that many places outside of there. So in my
mhm.
mind, I was like New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, like it's all New
Maine.
England. It's just,
Yeah, yeah.
it's up there in the corner. But yeah, it's just those six states that are really up there in the
hmm
northeast corner. So anyway, I think the main one to talk about here, and this is probably the American rum distillery that is most known to rum enthusiasts,
Yeah.
is Privateer, which is located in Ipswich, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. Started in 2011. We went into pretty deep detail into Privateer in one of our first episodes, which was with Maggie Campbell, who was formerly the head distiller there. She's no longer there anymore. She has now taken her talents to Mount Gay, which we've had her back on the show since then as well. But I think tons of people know Privateer through, her. She was very visible in the rum world and everything. But
Yeah.
this gets back to our whole molasses and crystallized sugar thing, because
Hmm.
in the past, for the majority of their history to date, they used to use a combination of molasses and crystallized, like a kind of a raw, less refined crystallized sugar for their rums. They also did have some that were 100% molasses. I believe their Navy Yard rum was always 100% molasses. But
Hmm.
anyway, since around 2019, they shifted to all molasses. And I think in our episode with Maggie, we talk, because that was shortly after, or yeah, like right around when they made that shift.
Right.
And so, go back and listen to that if you want more insight into like why they did that and sort of what can be the pitfalls of crystallized sugar and things like that. But so now if you buy some of their rums, everything is made with 100% molasses. But as you were referring earlier, what you get from a distillery now isn't what they're making right now, unless you're buying unaged stuff. So they still have some aged products that are coming out, that will have been made with the molasses and crystallized sugar in some of them. So, probably 10 years from now or whatever, it'll all be 100% molasses. But in the meantime, there's sort of a mishmash. But hybrid batch distillation, feature pot and column. They do a lot of different, still configurations. They do a lot of blending at Privateer, which is, I think, one of the things that really makes them stand out. A lot of blending of casks of various ages, various cask types, things like that. They have a standard unaged white rum now. They have a standard reserve rum, which
Yeah.
again, this is something that's uncommon to see in American rum, is when someone has a standard aged product that is like, not just a one-off 2-year rum or one-off 3-year
Right.
rum or
That's true.
whatever.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have a New England Reserve rum. It's a blend of rums aged 2 to 6 years. So again, showcasing that blending. But I think their goal with that rum is to get to a consistent profile. It's not just, here's whatever we had. It's always going to be this aged range, but we're like specifically making rums for this blend to keep it consistent. They also have their Navy Yard rums, which they have a 2-year Navy Yard and a 4-year Navy Yard. I believe all of those are aged in 100% new American oak. Whereas the other one, they use a lot of different cask types. They use rum casks. They use, a bunch of different things. They've also done a Queen Share rum for a long time. They were maybe really, them and Maggie's Farm in Pittsburgh were the first two American rum distilleries that I really saw putting the Queen Share style out there. And they've released those at a variety of ages and cooperages. They also do their Distiller's Drawer series. Actually, I think they've renamed that now. I think it's Letter of Marque now. But those are
Yes.
like
Letters of mark.
one-off single cask releases that they do every year. And, you'll see everything from apple brandy casks to cognac casks to new American oak casks. Like it's a lot of different stuff. So I think they're the one. Obviously, they had the big collaboration with Vellier a few years back. Habitation Vellier did a release of theirs. Vellier did some
2017.
standard releases as well. So that's why I kind of describe them as like they're the ones that I think are on most people's radar, and maybe you're most likely to have experience. But they, like, I think if you're introducing someone to American rum, they're kind of like in that lineup as well.
Yeah, I think, and therein lies part of the problem. And let me explain what I mean by that, which is when I think American rum, well, less now than when I kind of a few years ago, but when I think American rum, I always tend to think Privateer.
And like that
But
new American oak kind of
yeah,
taste.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. The new American oak, the profile that they bring, which I'm a fan of. So I really enjoy their product. And when I found this is what the first time I kind of discovered them, I was like, this is American rum. But as we're kind of talking through all of this, the point here is, well, that's problematic because there's so much to American rum that in my head, the way this was as American rum is not indicative of every American rum. It's I guess to our point of what we're trying to do, it's kind of a New England rum style.
Well, that's a really, like, I'm really glad you brought that up. And I think there's a few reasons for like why I think they're so synonymous with American rum style for a lot of people. And that's one, I mean, they're they've been just the most visible brand among
Right.
rum geeks, first of all.
Right.
Second of
Right.
all, I think their branding has always
The
leaned
branding.
into, I
Yes.
mean, like
Yeah.
their logo has kind of like it's kind of suggestive of the stripes on the American flag,
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
wavy. And then also their rum style just has always tasted distinct from rum styles across the world. Like it's not trying to taste like a Caribbean rum at all.
Right.
They use a lot of new oak. They don't use exclusively new oak, but so it I mean, a lot of people compare their rums to whiskey, and I think the new oak is one of the big reasons for that, just because, most
Yep.
American whiskey is aged, bourbon is aged in new oak. So you get some of those characteristics. But so yeah, I think all that combined, like that's what a lot of people think of when they think of American rum. But and I think they're kind of I mean, they've always leaned into being an American rum, but I think being a New England rum has become like a bigger part of their brand in recent years as well. Like the white rum now is called New
Yeah.
England White. It didn't used to be called
hmm
that. The
hmm
Reserve, I think, is New England Reserve. So, and I think it's smart to do that because, the New England, that's like I think New England rum doesn't take up as much brain space for people now as it did, a few hundred years ago, but
That's a good point. Yeah.
it does have that historical connection.
Yeah, and
Um,
they've had some bottled and bond releases
yeah.
also, I think. So
hmm
there's a little bit of a tie-in there to that kind of thing as well. I agree with you for sure that they do harken back to a little bit of the whiskey culture as
hmm
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just a couple more to hit up here. These distilleries, a couple I'm going to mention here are ones that I have not tried personally, but that I've heard a lot about, and one that is doing something that I think is just pretty notable. One of those is Newport Distilling Company in Newport, Rhode Island. They've been around since 2006, so long time for an American rum distillery. They make a rum that's called Thomas Tew rum, which you may have seen before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pot distilled molasses. And to me, what's notable about it is how old their rums are that they put out. Like, I think their like entry level aged rum is is a 5 year age statement rum.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
also have one that's a blend of 7 to 9 year old rum, and I think I just saw label approval for a 10-year rum from them, which again is just
Hmm.
very rare to see that with American rum. But this is one for me that's like you were talking about being frustrated about not being able to try Relaison. This Thomas Tew is one for me. I still haven't had it, and so I'm just
hmm
curious because you know it's been around for so long. I want to try it. I'll have more
Yeah.
to say once I'm able to do that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I haven't seen that much down here either at all, but I know of it very
hmm
well, and I agree with you. It's hard to find those higher age statements. By the way, it doesn't really fit here, but I did want to mention that when I walked into a local store here in Miami recently, there is a Miami distillery that is producing a 10-year rum,
Really,
age statement rum. Yeah, they call it a Centenario, which
what
I
distillery
found
is it?
weird. It's the Miami. It's I think it's literally called Miami Distillery.
Oh
Um,
wait, are they the ones that make the like Miami Club rum?
yes,
Okay.
yes, but they're
I,
putting out a 10-year rum. Now, the only thing I could think of is because I haven't got a chance to, so maybe we just cut this, but
yeah,
it may be sourced.
yeah.
So,
I would
but
guess it probably is, but
yeah.
maybe not. Who knows?
All right. Well, we'll
Um,
look into it, but it
yeah,
just struck me that I saw a 10-year aged rum from them recently.
yeah, for sure. That would definitely be notable. If it's one they distilled. The two more real quick for New England. One of them is Bartlett Spirits of Maine Distillery, located in Goldsboro, Maine. They make a rum called Rusticator rum, which the first person to really tell me about this rum was Maggie Campbell, actually. So this isn't one that I've had, but I know she has had this one. It's pot still rum, molasses base. I believe it's aged in French oak for 2 years, and I think it's like extremely small batch. Like I think what she was telling us about it, it's like you have to physically go there, like if you want it, basically. But she and others, who have lived in New England have raved about that rum. So that's definitely one to put on your radar if you're in Maine anytime soon. Look for Rusticator rum. Heard good things about it. And then the last one more in Maine, called Three of Strong Spirits. They started, I want to say, around 2019, 2020.
hmm
I've talked with their distiller and their two co-founders, tried some of their rums. Again, they started as a rum distillery. They've done some gin as well, I believe, but rum is still their primary thing. they also took that approach that we were talking about earlier. They sourced a 12-year Colombian rum to sell alongside their products. But yeah, they have an unaged rum. They have released, like, done some small batch aged stuff. They had a spice rum they sent me a sample of that was a really tasty spice rum. For, again, like we were saying earlier, it had like a lot of there was some kind of like tea used in it, and I don't
Cool.
remember, but it was very like, it reminded me of the holidays, and I enjoyed that. But so there
I
another
feel
one,
like
just
all spiced rums remind me of the holidays.
but yeah,
I
but
don't know.
this wasn't like it wasn't the same as, a lot of the, like, it wasn't just cinnamon and clove and stuff like that. Like, there
It
was
was a
some
different
interesting,
holiday.
yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on there. But
Okay.
anyway, they're another one, like, they're rum focused. They're serious about rum, so just another one to kind of, keep your eye on, especially if you're in Maine. To close things out though, we want to run through several of the exceptions. So again, these are, like, what we've talked about are places that we could see emerging as distinctive regions, where it's like a whole state or a whole part of
Mm-hmm.
a state or a
Mm-hmm.
whole region of the United States, like New England. The rest are just kind of like the exceptions to that. So there's plenty of places outside those regions that are doing interesting things that I think are, worth looking into.
Yeah.
One of
It
them we
feels like it
already,
would be unfair to not
oh, for
call these
sure.
out just because they're, a little more isolated or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the
Mm-hmm.
point
Mm-hmm.
of pointing out those other regions isn't to, like, exclude the rest of the United States. It's more
Right.
just like, there's a concentration of distilleries in these other regions that I could see developing a
Right. Right.
consistent style of some type. Like,
Right.
yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the near future there's some sort of like Louisiana rum
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
standard, or a New
Right.
England rum standard, maybe something
Right.
like that. So again, these are just the exceptions to those places. So one we already mentioned was Montana. I think that'll be another one that is not unfamiliar to many listeners. They've been at it since 2008, located in Crested Butte, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
They're another distillery. They use a combination of raw unrefined cane sugar and molasses to make their rum, and I do know they actually get that, like, directly from Louisiana. And Karen Hoskin has, given seminars and talked at great detail about, their sugarcane sourcing and everything. They have a lot of material on their website about it, so you can go read all about it there. But that's an example of, like, crystallized sugar that I think can actually make a good rum. It's because it's very raw, it's unrefined, it still has character to it. All pot still. They're another one doing something rare, which is their white rum is aged for a year and then filtered.
Yep.
Again, you just don't see that very much. They have a 1 year aged rum they call Oro. And Exclusiva is their 3-year-old rum. It's aged in ex whiskey barrels, and then and in French oak wine barrels and port barrels. And then they have a 4-year-old rum now called Valentia, aged in ex whiskey and then finished in ex rye. And one thing I'll point out about them is, this used to be something that I think kind of rankled rum nerds, was that Montana used to, I think at bottling, they would add like a really small amount of local Colorado honey to their bottle.
Oh, interesting.
And like, Karen has been a rum fan. Like, she was a rum geek before she started doing this. And she would always say, like, it wasn't to sweeten the rum. It was more like
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to add some touch of Colorado, to
Mm-hmm.
the rum. And she felt that, like, the honey brought out some things in the rum. But I think it just created so many questions about, like,
Right.
additives and sweetening from people. They just stopped doing that. So I think it was in
Mm-hmm.
2021 that they, like, when they released Valentia, I remember it being a big deal, part of the release, that, like, this is their first thing they're doing that they're not adding any of the honey to. But their website says as of 2021 they're not adding that to any of their rums anymore. So
Okay.
and that's another, like, pretty common thing. I don't think, I won't say none of the distillers we've talked about sweeten or use additives, but the vast majority, I think, of the places we've talked about, that are taking a quality approach to rum, like, they're not sweetening, they're not doing additives, and they're pretty transparent about that. Even
Right.
when they do add, so like Montana was always transparent about the honey.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it became, like, I don't know if it was too much of a hassle, or it could have been like a supply chain thing. I mean, I know, like, honey production and bees and everything is supposed to be a huge problem. So maybe it just wasn't feasible economically. But anyway, not doing that anymore.
Yep.
That's another one, like, I would just put in the lineup of like if you want to know what American rum's about, this should be in it, because just their reach is so big. They've been around for so long. I think they're going to continue to be around for a really long time. And just, distribution wise, they're available in Europe now in some places, so you can actually like get your hands on it.
And a cool label. I think their label's cool.
Yeah, their labels
just
are
me.
Yeah, I think everything it's they do a good job on like everything they're putting together over there. Real quick, man, I know we're really, see, we talked about, we could go on forever if we were going to name all these places, and we're already pushing 2 hours. So
oh my goodness.
I'll run through a few more that I wanted to talk about. Maggie's Farm, is I mentioned earlier, in Pittsburgh. They've been around since 2013. Going through a lot of expansion right now, so they've been very successful. They're another one that uses crystallized sugar for their rum. They have an unaged rum. They do a queen share rum. Actually, I was able to try their unaged queen share for the first time recently. I was really impressed with it. I hadn't had it before, and just a really quality, like, unaged white rum.
I did too, actually, at a recent rum festival. Yeah, Rum Renaissance, I think they were at, and they had a couple of products. And I, like you, was impressed by it. I thought it was very good. Yeah,
I know, like, I'd had a lot of they do a lot of single barrel releases. I'd had some of those, but I hadn't had that unaged queen share, and I was like, damn, this is good.
Yeah.
They've done a lot of blending. One rum you may be familiar with if you're listening, if you've ever seen Hidden Harbor white rum, it's basically a daiquiri rum that's actually made by Maggie's Farm, but it's a blend of their own rum with rums sourced from Jamaica, Guyana, Martinique, Barbados, Trinidad. And yeah, it was built to be a daiquiri rum, and it is like a really damn good daiquiri rum too. Excuse me. The last thing with them that you may, if you're a cocktail enthusiast, if you're a tiki enthusiast, you've definitely seen Maggie's Farm Falernum before, which is really good Falernum. It's I don't know how traditional it is in terms of comparing it to like the stuff you get in Barbados, but people really love that Falernum, and I think that's like, it's weirdly maybe the only Maggie's Farm product that is consistently distributed in Nashville. So like, I always see their Falernum, but their rums I don't see as much. So anyway, I would say go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have one comment on Maggie's Farm. This was one of the first American rums I had, as well as like we talked about with Privateer, and I've always kind of had a soft spot for them. I think they do a very good job with what they produce. This might be a hot take, I don't know, but I just think they have a branding problem a little bit.
Really? Why?
I do. I feel like the bottle design and the name Maggie's Farm it's not out there enough in a way that I think it is very crafty. So I get that. And maybe that's their approach. They're going crafty. And I could tell by the look on your face, you disagree with me, which is fine. But I don't see, I think part of what's holding them back, because I think the quality of the product is really good, but the bottle and the name and all of that is not pulling people to buy it.
Interesting.
It's just my take.
I've never had. I actually think one thing that they've managed to pull off really well is on a lot of their labels, they have kind of like a skeleton on it.
They do.
And it's or like a skull, but I've never thought of like pirates when I see it. So like, maybe you have, but I never have. And I've always thought their labels are kind of cool. Maggie,
I think it's tough because they're in Pittsburgh. So how do you, like, I don't know how that works, but I just feel like there's something that they could
Pirates, do. The baseball team, right?
You're right.
But again, it doesn't make me think of pirates. I think if it did make me think of pirates, I would be like not as into it. But, maybe I'm predisposed to like the name Maggie's Farm as well, because we've talked about him, a big Bob Dylan fan. There's a Bob Dylan song, Maggie's Farm. I ain't gonna work on Maggie's Farm. Is that where that comes from?
Okay.
So it might come from that, but
okay.
Well, I just feel have you ever seen their Falernum?
I have. I've tasted it, and it is very good. Yeah.
Well, but like the bottle design, because it's very different from what their other, like it's a dark, it's almost like a charcoal colored bottle, and the label, I've always thought it was really cool and put together. Like, it really stands out when you see it in stores, and it's completely different from the rest of their stuff. So I'm just curious.
I'm okay with that one. I'm looking it up now, and I see it, and it's fine. It's fine for me. But I guess, in stark contrast to Montana, which I think does a fantastic job of their whole brand kind of production, from the bottle to the label to the name to, their different rums, Valentia and all these
Uh-huh.
other ones. They're really doing that well, I think. And some of the other ones in the US, I think, are also doing that, Virago and some of the other ones. But I don't know why. Again, it could just be me, Will. I'm willing to admit that I might be in the super minority here, but Maggie's Farm and the way that their bottle looks on the shelf does not make me think it stands out.
Okay.
So,
Well, our area of biggest disagreement is usually
yeah.
bottle and
But
label
their product
design, and
should. Their product
I
should.
disagree with you
Yeah.
there. I don't think they have a branding problem, but if anyone wants to call the John Gulla branding consultancy, we will we'll put the phone number for that in the show notes. Um, you just mentioned Virago Spirits. They were one that I wanted to mention as well. Started 2019, Richmond, Virginia. They began with a series of sourced rums. It was a blend called four port rum. So four ports, four countries. They did a variety of finished versions of that blend. But the whole time they've been distilling their own rum as well. They do like direct fire, Charente style pot still distillation, all molasses based. And I don't know, a couple years ago, they sent me a bottle. The first thing they bottled, and I think it was for like local bartenders. It was so funny to me that this was the first thing they bottled. It was a unaged 151 proof rum. They
Yeah.
sent me a bottle of that. And I was really impressed with it. Like I thought, if you proofed it down a little bit, I thought it would make, a fabulous, just, standard white rum to use. But I know they've also they have a bunch of stuff aging. I think they may have done some very small local releases of aged stuff. I haven't had any of it, but they're just like that. The unaged rum impressed me so much, and just like
Hmm.
the fact that they're focused on rum. They've got the big pot still and everything. They're just on my list of like something I'm keeping an eye on. So I wanted to share that with everyone else.
I agree. Yeah, I think they're getting there, and they're doing good things there. I believe they're kind of in their process. They're on their journey in my mind, and
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to what's coming from them soon. By the way, Virago. Do you know what a Virago is by any chance, Will?
I don't know what a Virago is. I feel like
Uh, a vir-
there's like a woman on their label, right?
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a female warrior in ancient times,
Okay.
a virago, but the word vir, vir, is actually masculine. It means
Oh,
like a masculine thing in Latin. So a
interesting.
virago is kind of a male like woman in a way.
Okay.
And then it comes into the language later to mean like an ill-tempered or mannered woman in a weird way as well. But I think that's also got forgotten now, and they're going back to the original meaning of what a virago, a female warrior, would be. And that, like
Interesting.
you said, it's echoed on their label. I just found that interesting. I thought it's kind of cool. I'm a classics nerd, so
Yeah, nice little language lesson there for all the Latin heads in the audience. To close it out, I'll mention two more. One is a newer up and coming distillery, and one is maybe the oldest still operating rum distillery in this new wave of American rum distilleries. But the newer one is Striped Lion. They're in New Jersey, started in 2020. Started by Kevin and Aaron Wright, and I mention them by name just because if you've been to any rum festivals in the US, like you've probably run into them.
yeah,
Great people. They're rum enthusiasts. Like they're basically rum enthusiasts who went to all the festivals and eventually decided to start their own rum distillery. Which anytime that happens, anytime I know the person who started the distillery loves rum and like recognizes what good rum is, I'm like,
hmm,
okay, like they have a chance, because
yeah, yeah. You're
they know
pulling
what's
for them.
up.
Yes,
Exactly,
yeah.
pulling for them. But yeah, all pot still, all molasses. I've been able to try some of their stuff. Everything I've had from them has been unaged. Um, Another unaged overproof that I've been really impressed with, kind of like the Virago. And they've also sourced some blends that they've
Yes.
released on their own and done their own cask finishes on. So
Hmm.
they're aging some of their own stuff as well. So I know that's coming at some point. And just another one, kind of like Virago, that's on my list of ones to check out. And last but not least, what I think is the oldest rum distillery. I know there was Old New Orleans rum in New Orleans that had been around for forever, but I think they recently closed. Pritchard's distillery right here in my home state of Tennessee started 1997.
Wow.
97. I was
You're
9
the
years old.
grandfather out there. Yeah.
9 years old when they started making rum. All pot still, all molasses, and again, I think they're probably the longest tenured American rum distillery. Do their aging all in new American oak. They have a standard aged bottling that I think is like an age range of maybe like 3 to 5 or 3 to 6, 3 to 7 years, somewhere in there. And they've done some older, smaller releases here and there, but they're just one that's been around for so long that you can't really mention the category without mentioning them.
Agreed.
And I think the one thing, like, they've been around for so long, but I feel like they've just consistently put out the same things over and over. So you don't see a lot of like the limited releases and stuff from them like we see from a lot of the other places. And I wish I
Hmm.
saw that more, especially because they're local to me. So I'd actually have access to those releases. So I
Hmm.
do wish I saw a little bit more of that from them, but one I wanted to mention here at the end. But um
Yeah.
I don't know, John, any final thoughts?
Yeah, actually, so well, before we get into full final thoughts, I don't know why all of this is coming out at the end, but Pritchard's is another one that needs an upgrade for their image, I think. I
Mm,
feel like it's stuck in the 90s a little.
okay.
Um God, I feel like I'm being so negative with some of these now. I don't mean to be, but it's just when we're talking about these places where we want to see them succeed,
Uh-huh.
these are things that come up in my head. I'm like, that one looks like the bottle is from the 90s or the 80s still. So I
Mm,
really want to see them do something a little bit to update their product line. All right, so putting all of this together, um, the first thought I had was number one, wow, there's just so much here. We could do a full another podcast, I think,
yeah.
and talk about different ones. And number two is, how do you bring this across in a meaningful way if you've got somebody in front of you? So, Will, what's your flight look like if you've got, a 4 or maybe a 5
Oh,
max rum flight of
man.
you're introducing somebody to American rum?
Okay, well, I feel like I've got to do like one from each of these,
Yeah, it does
quote
feel that
unquote
way.
regions that I
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
so I think, for Hawaii, if it's, well, I think I do this for anyone. I think I would do Kohana from Hawaii.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think from Louisiana, honestly, I might do two, just because, like you were saying, there's
Mm-hmm.
so much
Mm-hmm.
interesting stuff going on, and like there's
Yeah.
different stuff. So I think I personally, if it's a rum enthusiast, I'm definitely doing some Rules on unaged overproof. And then I'd probably do one of the cane juice rums.
Mm-hmm.
So probably right now, Cherami. I would throw them in there. Their unaged rum, just their standard one. And then Richland, I already said they would be in mine.
Yeah.
Privateer, I think, has to be in there. And mm, how many am I up to? Is that like, I think I've already done
I
like
think you're
five.
I think you're at 4 or 5. Gosh, I lost count
Okay.
too. But if you
Yeah.
would do 2 from Louisiana, I think you're at 5. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then the last one I put in is Montagna, and maybe Maggie's Farm. Like, it's a 7 rum flight. It's a big one. Yeah. What
Yeah.
what what about you?
I think I'm pretty close. Like you said, know your audience. If this is a person who is
Yeah.
a rum head, I'm gonna pick certain things like Kohana or Kuliana to start with, and
Hmm.
then like you said about the Louisiana, I would agree with you there. But if this is a person who is less familiar with rum, and I'm trying to give them the idea of what rum can be, I think
Hmm.
I'm actually gonna go with the more broad things. Like, so I would maybe do like Kaloa and the
Okay.
Bayou and
Yeah.
Richland and Privateer,
Hmm.
and that already gets me to 4, so maybe something like Montana.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it just really depends on who the audience is, but just to give you a counterpoint, because I agree with you, I'd probably pick the ones you picked if it's a rum geek. But if
Hmm.
it's not, that's the way I would go instead. Just those larger ones, maybe that they can also find on the shelf, which is also nice. I've
Hmm.
learned through doing some of this that I pour things for people, and then they go, "Where can I buy it?" And I say, "You can't," and they
Yeah.
give me
That's
a
true. That's a
nasty
good
look.
point. Yeah.
So yeah, there's that, but yeah, it's a lot of American rum out there, and that is a great thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, it's exciting. I think that's what's interesting to me about the category is like there's just so much going on that, like, even if only 5% of it ends up being really good, that's still like, I don't know, it's like 20
Yeah,
something
yeah,
distilleries
that's
that are
true.
making really good rum. So you have to search to find the gems, and you certainly can wade through a lot of mediocre to bad stuff to get there.
Mediocre. Yes, I
I
agree.
mean, it's just the
It's
facts.
true. It's true though.
That's true of any spirit category in the U.S. There's so many craft distilleries that, like, even if I was talking about like craft whiskey in the U.S., like a lot of it is like really mediocre or bad, but there's
Right.
also some really good stuff. It's
Right.
just when there's so many people doing it who are all new to
Yes.
the discipline. And they're not all new. Some people come to craft distilling with experience, but a lot of people are doing it for the first time. So
yeah. And just to be clear, if we didn't talk about it, doesn't mean we think it's a mediocre rum. We're just saying like we couldn't get to them all.
We can't
but there,
no.
To your point, of the 500 or 700 that are out there, a good chunk of those are those mediocre rums that you just kind of have to try for yourself before you really figure it out. Or, try to look online and see what some of the rum geeks think, or however you can kind of get your information. But we feel like the ones we did talk about today are good examples of American rum that you can invest your time in if you find them on your shelf locally, or happen to be in those areas and you're traveling to those areas and can find them. So
and we'd love to hear from the listeners, what have your experiences been with American rum? Let us know ones that you've tried that have stood out, or if you struck out, let us know. We'll try to point you in the direction of something that's distributed in your area. But an exciting category that I think we're going to continue to see a lot of interesting stuff from, just like in a lot of these other countries I mentioned, like places in Europe we're starting to see have smaller craft type distilleries like this. I'm excited to see what comes out of those in the next decade or two. So John, with all that said, I think we can wrap this one up.
Yeah, let's do it. So let's make sure we talk about Patreon with people. So the Patreon's doing awesome. We have our next gathering soon. I think, is that March 29th?
Yeah, our next happy hour for our cask strength patrons. As we mentioned earlier in the middle of the episode, now doing annual subscriptions. We just turned those on. So if you subscribe annually, you can save 10%. It's basically like getting a little more than 1 month free when you do it at either tier level. So it's been like a year of Patreon. It's been so much cooler than I thought it would be. Just like having that extra layer of community and like getting to hang out with listeners on the happy hour. And
agreed.
So many of our listeners are extremely knowledgeable about rum. A lot of people on the happy hours are also making rum. It's just a cool, fun thing we do once a month now. So you can go to patreon.com/the Rumcast to check that out. patreon.com/the Rumcast. As always, you can also find us on social media. John, where's the best place to do that?
At the Rumcast on Instagram's probably our biggest platform right now is Instagram, and then Facebook as well. We do post on Twitter, but we don't do much else on Twitter. So you can find us there. Give us a DM if you want to contact us through there. Host@rumcast.com if you want to email us with something you want to talk about, or tell us what you thought about, like Will said, what did we miss? What are some things that we should be paying attention to in American rum? We would love to hear more about that from people. So definitely get a hold of us. Let us know what's going on. Or if there's something else you want to hear us talk about, please let us know. We're always open to hearing what we should be covering. So get in touch with us through one of those ways. And I think that's it. We'll see everybody next time. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.